right. Sorry about that, everybody. I think we got it sorted now.
No problem. Here we are.
Yeah,
Welcome.
let me make sure everyone's on stage. I think we're good.
I don't think Sofia's on stage yet.
Oh no, we definitely got to fix that.
Yes.
All right, she's here.
I'm here.
Okay,
Hey.
perfect. Um, all right, everyone, welcome. Thanks for coming. Super excited today. Got a bit of an all-star crew. Lars Wander, Luke Shannon, OG of OG, Sofia Garcia, and General Polymath Savant, Toni Marinara. Thanks for coming, man. Super excited to have all of you here. Vaughn, I want to shoot it right over to you. A lot happening with stuff in the markets. Definitely excited to talk about Blur and what's happening with punks there. What's your initial thoughts, and how do you see this progressing for the market at large going forward beyond just punks?
The space to bid up punks in the short term is good. The problem is, it's kind of being done because it's a low, no fee, no royalty. Not that there are really people are paying royalties on Blur anyway, but the ability to have the high value, high turnover asset is definitely fuel for the Blur farmers. So, I haven't really been personally chasing the Blur points, but obviously it's a valid strategy, and I think punks play into it. So anytime you see a large liquidity injection, I'm not surprised to see that you're seeing the punk floor move up a little bit. The question is, once the Blur farmers go away, does it sustain it? But I will say this to you: I remember when Looks Rare dropped, or what was the platform even before LooksRare? Like every time these platforms come to market, a lot of money does get made by people, and a lot of it does find its way into better tier blue chip assets. And we have seen legit rallies start off of stuff like this. So, I'm not holding my breath. I'm not expecting to kick off a new bull market necessarily, but you're seeing a big injection of liquidity to the punks market with people wrapping punks to trade on Blur, and it does have the potential to lead to more, but recognize that you can't really look at this and say this is the start of something until we see more traction. So I'm a little bit cautiously optimistic, but I'm not getting too excited about it.
Yeah, I think it's a little bit more interesting, or at least the way I think about it is like, sort of like what OpenSea has done up to this point, like how markets have changed with collection bidding and the idea that like you can use the same Ethereum multiple times over rather than like how the current Punks marketplace works. We have to sort of like bid manually each time, send ETH out each time, and that just makes for a less efficient market. Like obviously with Blur, it seems like the spreads are tighter right now. You don't have front running MEV concerns are a little bit less of an issue, and then effectively like it's a not even zero fee, it's like a negative fee environment because you're theoretically getting these incentives, right? Again, like I'm with you, like I
Yeah.
understand the cautious optimism, but I do think there are things that are going to be the impetus for the market going forward, and it's not just specific to punks, right? You think about all NFTs.
The thing is, I will say this, like, I mean, like when other so it has obviously the punk has to be wrapped to trade on Blur. I mean, I'm not saying I feel this way, but there are punk purist people that don't like the concept of punks being wrapped, and I've had plenty of discussions with people about it. Like once you unwrap it, it's there's no change in the underlying token, but there is some psychology. There are some people. I had many conversations in the punk Discord with people like, well, they don't want their punks to be wrapped. So I don't know if that will ever play into it. I recognize that the people that are driving the liquidity here don't really care necessarily about the long term provenance or issues that could surround that. I personally don't have a problem if a punk that I have ever owned or a punk that I own is wrapped, but there are some people out there that don't like to see that for whatever it's worth.
Yeah, fair. Matt, we saw obviously the big microdenza sale at Christie's, AC's piece, and how that has spurred a little bit of momentum with Fidenzas lately. It seems to be a bit of a bid. Super excited for that. I know, like watching that video live and watching the hammer come down was pretty incredible. Quite a moment. So yeah, curious if you caught that and sort of what you thought about it.
Yeah, it was definitely nice to see, and I think there was some worry that people were going to be holding on to their their bullets, so to speak, with this 3AC stuff looming. But it's really nice to see that piece sell at a good value. And I think, we're also seeing kind of across the broader market with Fidenza a couple of nice buys over the last few days. OSF has been rotating some of his profits from apes into his permanent collection, adding some Fidenzas. So it's good to see actual quality collectors coming in, new ones, so to speak. That's what we like to see.
Yeah, cool.
So let's also highlight there was a nice 350 ETH spiral sale last night. That was a
Yeah, that was a
unicorn.
nice one.
Yeah, that's a great spiral. Really, really love that one.
Yeah, that was a great one.
Yeah. Bro Jackson was a seller. I know he's got 2 spirals. Has another spiral. He also has that yellow Lux
And
palette
I
spiral.
actually think the spiral that sold was one that got hacked from him like a few months back, and then he bought it back
Oh,
for
right.
66. So
Who saved that for him? Was it Trill that bought it and
was it
gave
Keyboard
it back
Monkey? It
to
might have
him?
been
Or
Keyboard Monkey.
Keyboard Monkey. Yeah, it was him.
Sophia, I'm
It was a
sort
nice
of
sale.
curious. Like, Sophia, I would generally, not force you into like market related discussion, but just someone with a perspective of like, okay, you set this show several years ago where you're selling like Dimitri pieces and Tyler pieces for what, I guess like a few $1,000s at the time. Like,
A couple
right.
hundred.
So like, what's that like journey like mentally, like where you sort of like revert back to that time and then you're like watching this thing live on Christie's and the hammer comes down, 6 figures. I mean, it's gotta be pretty cool, right?
Yeah, it's really crazy. I guess mostly because I don't think I expected it to happen so fast. I think that's been the biggest like takeaway just over the last few years because even I think when Sotheby's did their first sale, which included one of Dimitri's works, I had sold I think maybe four pieces or 5 pieces of Dimitri's to that collector for maybe $7,000, and for them to take one of those works and sell it for 1.5 was insane. Just a year, not even like a pretty much a full year um, after. And so now I think we've come to a point where at least the numbers to me seem to be at least balancing out ever so slightly, that they're not like too absurd. And so that's why I was really happy with that Fidenza sale, where it seemed like it was just a really fair price for where we are at the market. And it also went to an incredible collector. And that's really for anyone who kind of is always talking about, oh, like you want to get that more traditional art collector in there. It definitely went into one of those collections. So that's a win across the board in terms of anyone who's hoping to kind of get that support kind of across what's the word that I'm looking for? Just I guess like entities. Like it's not just another like crypto person coming in and supporting something that we all believe in. This is a new take, and they were really excited to support Tyler and really understand what's going on. So it's great to see. Obviously, just to see that people are finally understanding what we've kind of been fighting for all along.
I was just going to add to that seeing traditional art collectors looking at Fidenza and taking it seriously and seeing that auction that AB was just referencing and having, Tyler Hobbs' piece go with all the other great 20th and 21st century artists that were in that sale. It's pretty amazing and really sets the stage. I mean, personally, like I know that this could potentially come back and haunt me, but I'm going to say it nevertheless. Like I think the days of buying Fidenzas under 100,000 US is just it's gone. So, but we'll see.
I was waiting for
You're about to
I
Garcia.
was waiting for Sophia to tell us who the collector was, but I don't know if we can squeeze it out of her or not.
No, I'm not sure what A lot of the traditional art collectors are very, very, very private, very private. So unless they want to come out and say it publicly, I won't give too much information. But it's a great buyer, really, really great collection for Tyler to be a part of for
Yeah,
sure.
awesome. Yeah, that's great stuff. Uh, Matt, we talked a little bit offline about like ordinals, what's happening with this Yuga drop over on the Bitcoin ecosystem. What do you know there? What are you excited
Yeah.
about?
I'm still trying to kind of wrap my head around it, to be honest.
Yeah.
Like just getting like familiar with the mechanics and stuff. But as far as like ordinals are concerned, there hasn't been much that I've seen up to this point that really strikes my interest. It's mostly just people trying to get early inscriptions on there. But, if there's not much of a story behind it, it really doesn't do much for me beyond that. So this one's a little bit more interesting just because, you actually have a real team behind the project. And, I don't know, I can't say much about the art. I mean, it's just kind of whatever to me personally, but I think it at least has some potential to etch itself in a historical context. That's kind of the way I'm thinking about it, but I honestly have no idea like how any of this stuff will trade long term. I could definitely see some hype and FOMO around it in the short term, but yeah, it's really kind of a tough one to wrap my head around. I'd be kind of curious to get other thoughts on how people are thinking about it.
Yeah, it seems like the Bitcoin ecosystem right now is everybody's just playing the same side of the trade, right? Like they're going after that like first mover, like provenance, like play. Okay, like we want to be like the autoglyphs of like the Bitcoin ecosystem or whatever it ends up being. So that sort of seems to me like what's happening, but yeah, I'm not really sure.
Yeah, I mean, from an expected value standpoint, like you don't need to be right that often, even if you assign a low probability to that trade working out. The potential upside, if it really were to catch fire, you know, these are 100x, 500x type potential trades still. So like you have to like at least consider it. But you know, for now, I'm still on the sidelines on it, but we'll see.
Yeah, I guess also on our side because we've had those discussions are starting to pop up because everyone wants to work with generative artists, but I think it's experimentation is always I guess appreciated. So I'm really keen to see what kind of comes from this, but it's also really clear that the infrastructure is not really ready. I think a lot of the sales right now are happening like over discords and spreadsheets and things like this, and while that's great and I love that people are really going for it, there's also a lot of security issues when it comes to that also. So I want to see the infrastructure grow a little bit more, and then I probably feel a little bit more comfortable engaging. But again, like experimentation is always appreciated, and I'm excited to see what comes from it. Hopefully, something
Well,
good.
speaking of security and infrastructure, that's a pretty good transition into the announcement at ETH Denver about ERC 4337 and sort of what's happening with that new improvement. From what I read, the sort of highlights are no longer like needing these 12-word seed phrases and sort of just like bringing like new onboards in an easier way like into the Ethereum ecosystem. The idea around having a master key and guardians being able to help with recovery if the key is lost, things like bundled transactions rather than having to sign these one by one. External management, so third parties, social media accounts, et cetera, making that easier to spin up and manage these wallets, these addresses. So yeah, a lot of things happening there with user onboards in mind, and that's certainly nice to see to bring in the next however many millions into the ecosystem, right?
Yeah, we was I really need to like kind of do more research on this, and but at a high level, it definitely seems like a positive sign.
Yeah, agreed. Definitely like to see how it progresses. I guess we'll go into some introductions, although we've already been 15, 20 minutes in. I'll start with sort of our artists on stage today, Lars Wander and Luke Shannon. Lars, feel free to give us an intro, even though I guess we all know you. It'd still be great to hear a little bit about yourself and sort of journey through art and what you're working on.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. This is a real pleasure. I've listened to quite a few of these spaces and always enjoyed listening to the folks that you have on them. So it's a real privilege to be here. So I'm a generative artist. I'm based in New York. For the last 8 years, was working at Google, mainly on visualization software for the sort of large, big systems that they have there. And actually recently took the plunge and went full-time into generative artwork, realized that either I could dedicate myself fully to work or to art, and I really wanted to see what would happen if I could put myself fully into art. So this is my first month self-employed, and I'm really loving it, spending all my time sort of playing and tinkering and experimenting, and also really excited to share some of the stuff that we have planned for this year. I'll hand it back to you.
Perfect, thanks. Yeah, Luke, I had the pleasure of meeting you for the first time pretty recently, and excited to have you on and be here with us. And just, yeah, really curious to introduce you to the folks and or the ones that at least don't know you, which probably isn't many at this point. But yeah, just sort of like what you're working on these days and your journey as an artist, and I guess what's happening with you in school as well, because I guess most people don't know you're doing that at the same time, which is wild.
Yeah, hi. It's great to be speaking again. Can everyone hear me okay? Is it
Yeah,
working?
you're great.
Okay. Um, just like to check that. Yeah, thanks for having us all on. I guess brief introduction. I'm Luke Shannon. I've been a generative artist for about 5 years. Um, my first project was ARTBlock's Opera, and then did some one-of-ones, did some ceramics, orchids, and um, have been working on a bunch of projects recently that, yeah, I'm excited to get into a little bit. But yeah, I generally focus on physical generative art, mediums like embroidery, plotting, ceramics. So excited to talk about those today and really glad to be here.
Thanks, Luke. Sofia, I guess give us the intro, even though you're probably the most known of any of us. So go for it.
Hi guys, Sofia. I'm the founder of ARTXCODE. We are, I guess, at this point, a generative art agency. We represent and manage amazing artists like Lars and Luke, and we also have a creative studio where we work on some really fun projects. And yeah, we've been doing this for a few years now, and just it's a good time all around. And we'll leave it at that.
Short and sweet. I love it. Toni, go ahead.
Hey, Tony. I'm an artist rep at ARTXCODE, and I also act as the in-house legal, taking care of all the boring stuff. And I can just leave it at that. I'm also, I guess I got into the space as a collector too, and it's evolved over time into this, so it's pretty great to be here.
Not a word about your cooking skills. What a travesty.
I cook from time to time.
Yeah, fair enough. Um, I guess I'll just throw it right back to you, Toni. I mean, when you guys are thinking about onboarding some of these artists and you're searching around the ecosystem, like sort of, and you come across people like Luke and Lars specifically, like I guess when you stumbled on both of them, what was it about them? Like, what do you think made them special, or what made their art special more specifically? Like, what stood out to you?
Yeah, I think, from where I'm sitting now at ArtXCode, I never really took off my collector's hat. Like when we look for people to work with or entertain, when people reach out to us, whether it's a good match or not, I just always keep that collector's hat on, and it's like, well, is this art that I would kind of connect with from a collector's level, just aesthetically, um, as like the first thing, because of course you see something first, and then you know digging into the process and the bones of how an artist makes their work. It's quite interesting, and it's like peeling back and the layers of an onion, and the more you find out, if the more you get excited, and that's a great sign. um, and overall good humans. Like we love to work with good friendly people, and Lars and Luke are exemplary humans. And with both of them, I guess I'll start with Luke, because Luke is actually one of the first artists that I ever collected on chain. Like I saw the opera and I minted it from mobile, and I was so excited about it. I think Sophia and I were texting, just like, this is so fun. It had this playful, just airiness to it. I mean, I guess from the nature of the movement of the opera. And I don't know if everyone's seen it here, but I definitely encourage you to check it out. It's on Art Blocks. Um, it it struck me just from a visual standpoint. At that point in the game, I really didn't even know too much about what goes into creating generative art. So it just aesthetically was pleasing. And then I would never have expected that the work that I've seen from Luke since the opera came from that same artist. Like it just speaks to his versatility. Whether it's orchids, I don't think, from just a visual standpoint, you would really connect the dots that the person who made orchids made the opera. And, beyond his minted or digitally native works, like what he does in the physical realm, like really, really excites me. His plots and ceramics and his weaving studies, and I don't think a lot of people have actually seen those. Um, they have, just an ability to stand on their own. Like if he was only an artist who did his weaving, or only an artist who did his ceramics, I would be blown away by it. But it's not just that; it's all of these things together, and they really range in their feeling from just very playful works to extremely deep works that make you just, I don't know, feel. you know. Um, so when we meet with an artist at first, we kind of do a virtual studio visit where they take us down their artistic journey and everything that they're working on. And so that's like a great point to where you start to realize whether it's going to be a good fit or not. And with Luke, it was quite immediate, and I will say the same for Lars. So I can switch over to talking about Lars now. But I think the first thing I ever saw from Lars was his generative paint mixing algorithm that has now become what everyone knows as How You See Me. But at first, they were these studies called Splat. It was Splat 1N, Splat 2N, Splat 3N, and those were on Object. And he had posted, I don't know how, I got really lucky. I just had Lars come up on my Twitter feed. One day he had posted a picture of one of the splats, and I contacted him and I was like, can you mint this? And um, it looked like something I hadn't seen before. I mean, I knew that there was something there just from the aesthetics immediately, and then I was curious, like who is this guy? Like this is great. It was an edition of 10, and I bought all 10 selfishly, but I did leave another edition of 10 up there, and I really regret not scooping them all. But so yeah, I was curious about his work, and I went to his website, and on his site, he mentioned that he was a programmer at Google, and that of course like had me raise my eyebrow. I was like, all right, this guy's somebody. And then his blog posts where he was talking about his explorations with plotting and giving other artists actually, or anyone who wants to learn tips about how he codes. It was really insightful. Like just there was a lot of thought behind what he was saying, and it was evident that this is a serious person like this, and that was only when it was his hobby. So the aesthetic mixed with what seemed to be this curiosity that he had towards the craft, and also the generosity of just putting it out there to explain to people how he does what he does. And he didn't have an audience at this point. Like he just seemed like someone who really loved this stuff. And that's a big ding, when you see artists that you want to work with, like someone that's super passionate. And I mean, look at him today. He left Google and he's doing this full time, which is a massive commitment. But that curiosity that I saw in those posts is definitely something that is a good marker for an artist and for any human, right? To continually want to explore, grow, and learn. And I think that we're all seeing that with Lars's work, because each time we talk, it's like he's unlocked a new level in his artistic practice. Like he's just constantly doing the work, doing the research to learn more and how to push his algorithms to new heights. And I don't know, it's beautiful. I know that you agree, AB, and I mean everyone else here. But yeah, so there's that paired with the fact that these are two of the nicest guys I've ever spoken to in my life. Like I love them. We love them. So that makes working together easy. But yeah, I think a lot of it was just from my collector's hat moving towards these deep dives with them when we decided, let's work together. Let's start the conversation about working together, that it really all just clicks. And I guess I'll stop talking now because that was a lot.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, Sophia, you wanna give a go, maybe in a little bit slightly more condensed format.
Yeah, I mean, I was really lucky that Tony and Lars just had such a wonderful relationship right off the bat, and it was actually through their discussions. I was staying at Tony's apartment in London at the time when they kind of started having these conversations around representation, and we kind of just looked at each other and was like, should we just do this? Like, should we do? And so it was Lars was probably, I had been representing kind of like in an unofficial official manner, It's Soul Yard, and so it was kind of like, why don't we give this a shot? Let's do it. And so, we've silently been starting to, bring on some artists. And the first time I met Lars and was able to go to his studio, it was really something special. And I really understood what Tony saw. So it's also really wonderful that I can trust Tony. I can trust his taste. That's not something that I can do all the time. So that was really incredible, and I'm really happy that now I have the opportunity to work with him. And then with Luke, I mean, the first time I saw Luke's work show up at the curation board at Art Blocks, I was like, hell yes! It was the first time I saw a work that was really natural in its movement. It was actually playing around with human form, even though it's like an abstracted human form. At that time at Art Blocks, everything was very, I guess, like vector based, straight. You had fidenzas that were kind of like, they had their movements to it, but for the most part, this was the first time I saw something that made me kind of, it had that haunting feeling to it, which was really, really exciting. But I also knew, Luke is just getting started. It was just the beginning. And so recently when I caught up with Luke and, was able to do that deep dive into what he's been working on over the last year or so. And I was just blown away with just the breadth of his practice and what he's been able to accomplish, and just everything that he's working on. Like, I cannot wait for everyone to kind of see what he's up to. It's And I told Luke, I mean, I'm just like the biggest fangirl with the artists that I work with, and it just gets me so excited. So I will leave it at that. But it's really great to work with just like two like just incredibly talented artists, and especially at this stage in their career, um it really is something special.
Yeah, right on. I mean, what do you think about? I mean, when you guys have had these conversations, you and Tony and the rest of the crew at ARTXCODE. I mean, when you think about artist management in the Web3 space, I mean, this could be a bit of a myth, but sort of it seems like there's at least a trend, or there has been a trend about like artists sort of doing everything, right? Whereas like I'm sure as on the traditional
Yeah.
side, it's like okay, like I'm just gonna make the art, I'm gonna sign with the gallery, and I'm going to let them handle like the logistics and the business side. And then like you see people like Dimitri or whatever who are just like talking to all the collectors, like talking to the museums, making the
Yeah.
art, handling the economics and the game theory of their drops, like the cadence, all that stuff. And so it's like I guess like why is it important? And is the trend going to like move more towards the traditional model where we're like you're hiring a gallery or artist management, or will we see a mix of both?
I mean, I think there will always be a mix. I think one of the cool parts about Web3 is, this idea that artists can be independent, but that's a blessing and a curse. I think that the structures that are in place in the traditional art world exist for a reason. I just think that some people can be a little bit more extractive than necessary. And the way that we go about it anyway is like it should feel like a win-win on both sides. You should feel really happy about like the commissions that are being paid because you're getting value out of what we're providing for you and the service that we're just trying to give. And so right now it's really overwhelming for a lot of the artists, especially generative artists. Everyone wants to work with a generative artist, everyone wants to do a generative art project, and they are just getting bombarded with opportunities and just getting bombarded with emails and messages. And it's really hard to figure out, like, when you're so in it, like what is actually a good project for me to do, like long-term strategy. What should be my pricing? How many should I be putting out? Like why am I doing this project in the first place? Am I just getting like caught up into the sales pitch, so on and so forth? And so we can kind of come in this like third party way and basically take a look at the project. And if we do think that it makes sense, then we'll be a part of it every step of the way and just make sure it's going to be done just be done well, and executed well, and we help with the curation, and we help with everything as much as we can. And it's funny that you bring up Dimitri, because he, back in the day, I worked really, really, really closely with him, and he had actually asked me to be his studio manager, but I had to respectfully decline because I want to work with, multiple artists. And at that time, the infrastructure wasn't nearly in place. So, he does a lot, and he loves being part of all the conversations, but even he needs help. It's and that's something, everyone could use some help in this space, and there's a lot to take on, and so we're just here to help because we've been here since the beginning. We have the best intentions, and we really just want to see this art movement like grow into a really special space.
Yeah, Toni and Sofia said a lot of kind words about us, but they really are, I feel like, superstars in what they do. So I just want to add on, like, beyond just even all the connections and intake stuff that they do, like, I trust their curatorial eye and instincts for projects and like looking long term more than anybody else really that I can think of. So super grateful to be involved with them.
Thanks, Luke.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a good time, honestly. It's like we all just care about each other. We all want to see like good things happen. You know what I mean? That's really what's going on at the end of the day. Like ARTXCODE has kind of gone through a lot of different iterations. It was really like this creative outlet for a really long time of, just like trying to figure out what does the generative art ecosystem need. I think in the early years of ARTXCODE, like 2016 through like 2018, it was really just like posting tutorials and sharing works of other people. And so now it's just come to a point where we're seeing what do the artists need, what like really what is it that they need, and how can we be of best best use to them. And this really just seems to make the most sense, and so we're really happy that we can do it, and with like great, incredibly like kind and talented artists.
Yeah, I mean, you definitely got two of them right here. Transitioning to that, Lars, I mean, moving to the artist side, I've sort of like talked to you a little bit about this, but maybe for the people listening, a little bit more broad strokes explanation. What's your process like? How would you describe it in as close to layman terms as you can, from top to bottom, whether that's on the execution side or more the conceptual side, or both?
Yeah, great question. Super hard to answer, I guess. I feel like every piece sort of starts from a different place, but it always comes from some sort of external inspiration, and generally a lot of time spent thinking about a system and what might be interesting to evaluate. I think, at least for me, what I always try to do is, with as little fluff as possible, to express and represent some core system or idea, and have the process be as much a part of the final output as the sort of aesthetic and visual image that you get. And what I've seen when I show my friends or people in my life the artwork, they're always happy to see it, but then when I explain how it was generated and what the code is doing, or why that's important and interesting in terms of the output they see, they always say that they appreciate the piece much more, and that makes me so happy, because I feel like it's so important to produce artworks that have something interesting or engaging going on behind them that goes beyond just the first thing that you see, and being able to engage with an artwork more deeply because of that process that goes into making it. And in this case, maybe I'm talking more about the program and the process than the process of me writing the program. But I think that, to me, that's very important. So when it comes to my overall process, when it comes to making these works, it's always about trying to find little ideas that I think are interesting to explore, and then somehow augment them by having a visual component. Like just the other day, I tweeted all the ways you can fill a 4x4 grid with 4 equal length lines. And I feel like it comes out of this idea of trying to write programs that enumerate all the possible states for a system, which I think is something that's sort of very intriguing and very underexplored in the sort of contemporary generative art scene, where there we kind of focus a lot on picking random outputs from a very large parameter space. But instead, now turning the focus towards programs where you can actually enumerate all the possible states and then placing them all on a single piece of paper, because I find that very intriguing. So I think my process is all over the place, but it always comes from this idea of trying to find and express something small and simple in a way that's very visually intriguing.
Yeah, I feel like you say that it's like relatively simple, and this is like after you've done like 350 hours of like research on the most abstract topic in like the most obscure corner of the internet, and then you're trying to figure out how to do like an unlimited amount of permutations on like a single subject. And so I'm just sitting here like, yeah, it sounds really simple.
That's beautiful, though. I think that's actually the simple things that are the most wonderful. And but you're spot on. I think it's always there's always a lot of complexity hidden in the simple. And I think that when something actually is very simple and it clicks, that usually means that a lot of work and effort went into making it that simple. It's never that easy in the first place. But so yeah, I appreciate that.
100%. That's well said. Luke, I'll pass it over to you. I mean, you know, I'm sure there's some similarity there with some of the descriptions that Lars made, but yeah, walk us through sort of how you think about it.
I just want to say quickly to Lars' point that, yeah, the way he thinks about systems and how intimate his understanding is and how well he defines like what's really fundamental to them and strips everything else away, is really inspiring to me. For me, a lot of my ideas first come from natural phenomena. I'll see something and like want to try to explore it or understand it. And I think generative art is one of the best ways for me to understand something just personally, because you really have to try to replicate the system and understand how it works on the interior in order to get like the outputs that you want. And then it also presents a view of a system that isn't limited to just one perspective, like to just one piece, but it shows it in all these different kinds of ways, all the different situations it can arise into. And so that's really compelling to me, and it helps me kind of think about it. And then inevitably, when I try to code that thing, there will be a bunch of like mistakes or unexpected paths that will lead to more ideas. And sometimes a one project can turn into like a dozen different projects where you change one parameter and then you get something that's very different. And that's also interesting. But even more interesting than that sometimes is like intentionally trying to break the algorithm. If I have an idea for like making a tree or something, then seeing ways that that algorithm or my implementation of it falls short of the process that the actual tree is following is really interesting as well, and reveals a lot about the system in the ways that the kind of system imitation I'm trying to make fails. And in general, like seeing systems, how they interact or shape the things they interact with. I have also a series on like decalibrating a pen plotter and plotting with it. And like seeing the way that the system of the pen plotter leaves impressions of itself, especially by trying to break it, and in different kinds of mediums, I'd say is something that my practice focuses on a lot.
I just wanted to add something, Lars. You opened me up to something right there with your comments. I have this Manfred Moore piece from the 70s, and it's basically just these cubes, small cubes that are done with a plotter printer. And it's shows all the different states of this cube as it slowly rotates across the paper in multiple lines. And I never really considered that that might have been exactly what he was doing, which was trying to show all the different states of this cube with very primitive, relative to what we have now, technology. And then ultimately, Manfred Moore goes on to really explore quite a bit with the cubes later on. So I don't know, just interesting hearing you talk about defining all the states of whatever parameter it was, and then relating it back to this piece that I have and really thinking about it a little bit differently. So thank you for that. I appreciate your comments.
I'm really happy to hear that. I love Manfred Moore, and he's a big inspiration of mine, and I'm positive that he's probably thinking about these things in a similar way, where he cares about using the computer to enumerate all these possible states, which is something that's kind of very unique to the medium and very compelling and intriguing in a way that I think you just echoed there. Also want to echo Luke's comments. I'm totally in love with Luke's work. I think he has such a careful and creative way of going about ways of exploring the interaction between the machine and the medium that it's drawing on. He showed to me these pieces where he had the same exact plot file drawn several times, and each time the visual interpretation on the piece of paper was dramatically different, and I found that so compelling and so interesting. I feel like Luke's really among us a great pioneer of the physical generative works, and I'm so excited to see what else he creates.
Yeah, it's super interesting. When Luke was talking about that, he was talking about the systems he creates and sort of this discovery, the intentional discovery, or I guess not intentional discovery, but intention of like breaking the system to some degree to like find discovery. And I know Iskra's in the chat. I talked to her a little bit before, and I think her and like William Mapan and some other artists go through that process as well of like breaking the system and organically like trying to figure out like what comes out of it. And that self-discovery process is really interesting relative to, Lars, I don't want to put you just on this single pedestal, but maybe like having this idea and sort of exploring like how many different ways can I think about it or shift it or change it or whatever. Just like different strokes for different folks, right? And it's really cool to see how artists stay within or go beyond and just think about things like radically differently when they're making their art. So I love that. Vaughn, I wonder, when we're thinking about like as collectors, like looking at some of these pieces, like we always have this discussion about like, do we care about aesthetics, process, mix of both? What do we find interesting? Do we need to relate it back to something that's more analog that we've seen before? Like how do you think about that stuff when you're looking at like some of these artists and the collections that they create?
Good question. Yeah, I mean, like hearing an artist's process and what goes into it, it definitely gives you some more things to think about. Yeah, I mean, I like what Lars had to say about exploring different iterations of a system and getting into all that. So sorry, I'm a little bit distracted. I apologize. No, I mean, I think it adds to the experience. It adds to what we're looking for. I mean, I'm always trying to have a compelling story. How was this created? Why did the artist do these different things? So, looking at a piece, sometimes it really is hard to understand all that's going on. So it's good to get the insight from the artist.
Yeah, without question. I mean, Sofia, like that's sort of one of the coolest things about artists native to like Web3, right? Is like on the traditional side, it's like sort of a bit more like pay to play. It's like, yeah, I'll explain to you my process if you buy a $250,000 like piece from me, right? Or it's like that accessibility factor. So the idea that you could jump into this space and talk to artists and they're super open and willing and just sort of willing to explain their processes and stuff like that, whether you own the work or not. I've always thought that was one of the biggest value adds for being in this space, I guess, on the collector side, especially.
Yeah, I mean, you get to hear their story like directly from their mouth. You know what I mean? And that is definitely something new that we just got, honestly, just through the onset of social media in general. Beforehand, it had to go through patrons and things of this sort, and you really got what the gallery would kind of transcribe on their behalf, which then kind of goes into more of the traditional art jargon speak, which can be really intimidating for many. And now, in real time, these artists, I think Lars and Luke do a really great job of this, is just sharing things that they're working on, and that you get to be part of that process. And Snowfro was talking about this the other day. Like it's one of his favorite things to see, just seeing and being part of the journey with the artists. And yeah, it makes this space a lot more exciting, I would say, and just the connection's a lot more authentic with an artwork, for sure.
Yeah, great. Lars, what are some things that, I mean, you haven't tried yet, like what are some things that I know you've got some projects upcoming. We can talk a little bit about those over the next 6 to 12 months maybe, but, is there something that's sort of on the back burner that you really want to explore that's maybe completely different than anything you've done up to this point?
Yeah, I feel like I have a million things I haven't explored. I love that you're asking this. I got fairly deep into a generative AI project where I was training models to optimize for an objective function that was meant to encapsulate something like that could be an interesting or a beautiful image. And made enough headway to the point where it was somewhat interesting to look at, but not all that compelling visually, and maybe really only intriguing if you knew the guts of how it worked. So I feel like it wasn't quite there yet. But I have a couple of ideas actually in the generative AI realm where I'm playing with building small models that I think actually produce somewhat interesting visual results. And I hopefully maybe this may be more likely a project for 2024 or beyond, but hope to do some generative AI work there. And another thing that's sort of always in the back of my mind, but I just don't have the space for yet because I'm still in my tiny apartment here in Chelsea, is to create kinetic sculptures, generative kinetic sculptures via 3D printing. So using sort of small atoms of motion and printing those and combining them at scale to produce large-scale kinetic sculptures from very many small moving pieces is something that I'm dying to try out. I have no idea how I would do it, but I'm just really excited to get my hands on a 3D printer and start to play with that. I think those are sort of the two big things that are kind of on the cusp of maybe becoming something that I'm very excited to play with.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks. Luke, we talked a little bit about you exploring some of these physical manifestations of some of the systems that you're creating. I know that's a big part of what you're looking at going forward. You can talk a little bit about that, or I'm curious if there's anything more expansive beyond that as well.
Yeah, there's always a bunch of new mediums that I'm trying to explore. Right now, the one that I'm the most excited about is generative glassware. I have kind of a system for setting up molds so that they can be constructed generatively and then glass blown to make like a physical piece. And that's really exciting to me. And there's a couple other like random mediums like that. But also just in terms of my practice, I'm interested in like trying out different ways of displaying generative art because I see generative art a lot of times as kind of a performance medium, especially with like in-person shows and with minting a project. I feel like that's a really unique kind of interaction between the artist and the viewer, where the artist's creation kind of really only exists because of the viewer's like action of viewing it. And so I'm thinking about ways to explore that like in display, different kinds of plotter shows and maybe digital shows. But yeah, bringing in some elements of play and interesting material, I think, is what's exciting to me going forward.
Thank you. Lars, I have a question for you. I'm looking forward to the upcoming Bright Moments drops. I plan to mint the whole run, both the generative art and the AI now, and I know you're one of the artists in the generative drop. I'm excited to see your work, and just kind of wondering how that's going, and if anything you want to share about it, or anything that you are interested in talking about relating to the upcoming Bright Moments drop, which I'm sure is going to be really good.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for asking about that. The series that I'm going to be releasing there, I've shared this I think previously on that Bright Moments stream, but it's going to be based on all of these light bending work in progress pieces that I've been showing on Twitter, which sort of focus on having these spherical refracting bodies that have light passing through them at different wavelengths, and then expressing all of this very chaotic and very colorful behavior where at its core, it's a sort of physically based simulation where instead of tracing RGB vectors like you do in a typical ray tracer or path marcher, it's tracing individual frequencies of light and their associated phases. And then in the end, for every single pixel, building up an associated spectral power distribution and then converting that back into RGB in a way that we can then display on a monitor. And I kind of love that this concept because on one hand, it's taking something that's very physically based and it's using empirical data about how our eyes convert wavelengths into colors in order for us to actually make sense of the image. but then also bending the rules of physics a little bit in terms of how the paths of light as they traverse through the scene are broken in ways that you really don't see in reality, and as a result getting something that sort of sits between something very physically real and something very surreal, I think in a way that you can really only properly explore if you're doing something like generative art or encoding these systems of rules and intentionally breaking them in ways that sort of falls outside of what you get in physical reality. So I'm very excited for the series. I think it's going to be an exciting set of 100 mints. It's going to be I haven't done a long form project in over a year now, so I think I'm very excited to get back into making long form art. My recent releases have all been curated one of ones, so it's going to be interesting to see how it goes.
Yeah,
How do
I've
you?
collected
Yeah, sorry.
your. Oh, I'm sorry, Matt. Go
No,
ahead.
no, go ahead.
Apologize. I was going to say I've collected your works on Tezos, Lars. So that is that what you're referring to? That was your last one of your last long form generative craft.
Yeah, exactly those, and then the lines walking uh, project on Potables, which was on ETH, was a little more than a year ago at this point that I released it, and since then I haven't done a long form drop.
I wanted to also follow up with Luke and just ask what you had next, but I also don't want to cut off my co-host Matt. So if you need to jump
I
in
think I was
here,
the one that cut you off first, so go ahead.
I just wanted to ask Luke. Obviously the opera I've looked at, seen, just kind of wondering what's next for you in terms of generative art. What's the next thing that you're coming to market with? If you could talk about it and just kind of just want to see what's next for you.
I'm still exploring a couple different options. There are some things that I'm not 100% sure I can tease yet with physical drops and like events associated with them. But I also have some exciting long form drops that I'm working on too, kind of in parallel to those. Um, One that's a series that's combined some of my hand drawings in generative ways. And I tried to really make the hand drawings integrate into the system in like a fundamental way. So um, I'm excited to see how those turned out too. And these will be more released in traditional ways.
Yeah, great. Um, Sophia, like, what are you hoping to see from artists like this year, maybe even the next like 2 or 3 years that like you either haven't seen yet or you're sort of seeing the beginnings of, in terms of like ideas, concepts, collections, etc.
I mean, I just think that the entire concept of bringing generative art outside of the computer screen is very, very exciting. And I think we spoke about it also on like the Collector's Corner podcast that was not too long ago, and really thinking about like what was coming this year. And it's honestly what makes me so excited about what Luke has been working on specifically because it has just gone like everything he's working on is just so fascinating and so outside of the box. What you kind of think of like the archetype of generative art right now, and so and what's happening with like Tram Paris. I don't know if you guys saw like the what they did with Alexi Andre and this massive tapestry and everything that went into making that happen. It's really really cool and exciting, and so that has to be probably like the one thing for sure that I'm really excited about, and it's just kind of again bringing it outside of our computer screen and making these objects that we can live in the physical world. Because as much as I love computational systems and that entire concept, we live in the real world. We love tangible objects. There's something really special about it. So yeah, that's the one thing I'm definitely looking forward to experimenting with, especially on the exhibition side as well.
Yeah, Tony, same your way.
Yeah, same here. Just physicality. Like maybe I'm old school. I like to touch things. Um, and another thing that is just so ingrained in artist practice and on the traditional front are artist books, and I think we've been seeing a few of those come out. Like the Meridians book looks incredible, And Dimitri and Helena have a book coming out now as well. And Helena's self-published a few artist books. So seeing those roll out, and I think we're going to see a few more of those coming in the near future, is something that really excites me too. Because it's more accessible, playful, can live on your coffee table book, and get people to dig into the practice. So definitely that.
I want to circle back to, we were talking briefly about Lars's Bright Moments drop and just more broadly long form projects. As an artist, I'm curious to hear from both Lars and Luke on this. How do you think about, I guess it probably depends from project to project, but in the example of Bright Moments, you're doing 100 editions. Like, are you building a algorithm that specifically cater to 100 exactly, or is it different when you're kind of working on a project without a predetermined amount of mints, where you can say, oh, this algorithm works well for 1,000 pieces, but maybe not so well for 100? I guess, how are you thinking about developing an algorithm with regards to how many pieces are ultimately going to be released from it?
Yeah, that's a great question, and definitely something that I've been thinking about a lot. I think, to be honest, actually, even going back, it's hard to really imagine what one like an algorithm that can suit 1,000 pieces really shines at, because it's so hard to, like, when you actually look at how much 1,000 is. 1,000 is a really big number when it comes to artworks. Like, if you want to look at 1,000 artworks individually, it would take you days. So it's kind of like a very difficult, I think, and there are of course projects that do it very well, but it's very difficult to make a project that has or really shines with 1,000 editions. That being said, though, I think it's very appealing and very tempting to sort of look at these smaller long form projects like the Bright Moments 100 mint model, because I feel like 100 pieces is still, like, when we saw 100 print by Ben Kovacs, I think it was a great way to appreciate even just 100 editions of a long form project all lined up on this giant wall to look at. It's a lot of pieces, and it's a lot to look at and a lot to really examine and explore. And I think in that case, Ben Kovacs really sort of nailed the edition size, where you kind of got a sense for the diversity of the algorithm. You felt like there were many mints that were still possible, that hadn't been explored, that were sort of sitting in the space between the mints that were created. And I think overall was a great example of, well, what does it look like when you have 100 of something and still make it look interesting and diverse? So for sure, I think about the number 100 when I'm working on this Bright Moments drop, because I think it's important to sort of have a good diversity of mints, but maybe not be too over the top to the point where you feel like you can't find what's sort of coherent or cohesive between all the different mints that were produced, but still sort of at a size where you can reasonably look at all of them and get a sense for what the collection's about. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, and I'm just curious, like, do you think artists are less willing to, and I obviously don't want you to have to speak for other artists, but in general, do you think you're less likely to take risks, I don't know if that's the right word, with an algorithm, as far as, like, pushing the envelope with, like, some outlier outputs that may pop up?
Yes, it's a great question. I think, like, I'm almost frustrated sometimes when I'm working on these projects with long form in mind, because I feel like the most exciting and the most interesting generative algorithms are always kind of sitting somewhere between that border between order and chaos. And if they go fully chaotic, then you sort of lose the ability to interpret what's in front of you. And if they're too ordered, then they become very boring very quickly. But sort of striking that edge between the order and the chaos is a very difficult thing to do, because you sort of inherently dip your toes either into the more chaotic or into the more orderly. And it's really only those outputs that kind of toe the line that are the most visually compelling and the most intriguing. And to do that consistently for 100 or 1,000 outputs in a long form project, and to encode in the algorithm a way to ensure that you don't step one way or the other too much, you almost have to sort of embrace the orderly a little bit more and go for algorithms that aren't so intentionally chaotic, because I think that, especially if you're an artist where people are expecting to pay quite a bit just to mint a random edition and not even know what it looks like, you really have to feel for the folks that might get a real bummer or a real dud of an output because you're trying to embrace the chaos a little too much. So I think that's actually one of the reasons why I spent most of last year working on curated pieces, was because I feel like it was so much more fun to work with an algorithm where you could really explore more broadly and go into the more chaotic and find those outlier outputs that were really fascinating and really visually beautiful and striking, and told the story that you wanted them to tell by embracing that chaos, but knowing that you didn't have to deal with the outlier outputs that were just really uninteresting or really boring.
And on this, I think there was I think it was Martin Grasser we were talking to, that he was basically just explaining like your system is really only as strong as your weakest output, and to build a system that can produce 1,000 works and not have a weak output is so extremely difficult. And I think the framework that you have to think about when you're creating a long form generative art project is so different when you're really just creating maybe a smaller visual system that you get to have fun curating outputs that you're like, wow, this is so much fun. This is like Lars, I could totally relate, because it was so much fun, like sitting in your studio going through a bunch of different outputs and being like, oh yes, this one. And that's how I used to work with a lot of the artists too before art blocks. But you can really appreciate some of these products that make it to curated on art blocks and beyond, just because of the skill set, not even the skill set, but just like the tenacity that you have to really break this system to this point where you feel confident enough to let it just unleash 1,000 artworks. You know what I mean? So yeah, that just wanted to throw that in there.
Yeah, because it seems like in late 2021, we got to a point where it was just standard for every single Art Blocks curated project to release 1,000 works, and it became pretty clear that a lot of those projects, weren't suited, were probably better suited
Yeah.
for smaller editions. But I think it also helps you appreciate some of those early projects that did achieve having an amazing range of diversity, with each output being, unique in its own right, but still cohesive. Like, it just kind of continues to drive home the point of how difficult it is to achieve that.
Yeah, and I think it's also just showing like there are just so many different types of generative art that exist out there. And just to touch upon like Dimitri once more, like he has explained, like he is like a systems like artist. Like he prides himself in being able to create an algorithm that can produce an infinite amount of pieces, but that doesn't mean that every single generative artist likes to create that way, and I don't think it's expected that they should have to create that way. So I think being able to kind of play around with the different types and the different processes out there is really important. And so we'll see.
Yeah, it's really
I
a
think
shame we didn't get
while
6
it's
more raptures. Just kidding.
Don't say that.
I think while it's difficult to execute a great long form project of 1,000 or more, it would be nice to see some pop up from time to time. I feel like the new trend of just going in the opposite direction that we're seeing on art blocks of smaller intimate projects, while some of those projects might be better suited for that, I wonder if people are shying away from doing the longer one now because of a market dynamic of not wanting to put out too much work. But I think that some work is really nicely suited for that longer form. It'd be nice to see.
It's sort of interesting because it gets into that discussion about, like, depending on your lens and the perspective, like, what is the right size, right? I mean, obviously, I guess not to like hack on bright moments too much, but the ones that are like 100 or less have a really difficult time with like velocity, right? Whereas the ones that are like closer to 1,000 allow for a lot of different collectors to like come in, allows for momentum to build, allows for like exposure to the collection that can last longer than a few days, right? And so I think that's like pretty interesting like discussion, and I'm curious, like, sort of when you think about ARTXCODE and its artists, like, how are you making those decisions? Like, it's sort of difficult, right? Because you have to consider it from multiple lenses.
Mm-hmm.
And then the artists may just be in disagreement. They may design the system and say, hey, listen, like, I've ran like hundreds of thousands of outputs at this point. Like, I just don't think like it should be more than a couple hundred, right? Or whatever the case is.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I mean, what's that process like? And how do those, is it more like, are they relying on you the other way around? You give them some rope? Like, what's that look like?
I think it's a. Oh, I'll let you go, Soph.
No, it's okay. I mean, it's always a conversation. You know what I mean? And I think
Yeah.
being able to become intimate with the algorithm and the system at place, like it's we're also in it with them. We're going through, we're refreshing, going through it, and trying to understand like what. Yeah, what are the pros and cons of going each way? Because I agree, there's something that happens when you have like 1,000 outputs, for example, that there and if it goes into enough wallets, so now there's this like instant visibility, and when it's a strong long form project, now there's the same that visual language goes across, and so thousands of people can now see this work and be like, okay, that's a Fidenza. Now I know what a Fidenza is. There's not kind of this like you can look at Andy Warhol like and his portraits and things like this. It took a while for people to like pick up and be like, okay, this is an Andy Warhol. Okay, great. Whatever it may be, it might take some time. With this, it's kind of instant. Now you have people sharing it, they're trading it, it's moving around, and there's something really powerful with that network effect that happens. That now there's just like instant. What's the word that I'm looking for? You just know it, and so that's I think something that's really really cool when it comes to like the larger products. But again, there are times where you do need to go on the more intimate side, and that's because that's what the system was made for.
Yeah, for sure. We'll take a few audience questions if anybody has them. Pop them in the chat. Raise your hand. Come on stage. We'll do a few of those. While we're waiting for those to come in, Sofia, just sort of building on that and the idea of like network effects. And I know we don't want to get too far into like sort of like market related talk, but yeah, just like the importance of like network effects and visibility for artists, and sometimes like a collection or exposure for a piece or a collection of works from an artist could, I don't want to say go stale for a while, but like people's attention spans are obviously quite short in this space. And so do you think like collection size sort of allows for a resurgence of a collection like later on? Like does that have any significance like in terms of like organic growth, like from people that otherwise didn't look at generative art 6 months ago and now are taking a look at it, and like those are the first things that they find, right? I mean, how does that work?
I don't know if it necessarily, if the larger collection lends itself to that, or rather than a shorter long form. I mean, I think it has to do really with the resurgence of collections. From what I've seen, has to do with if an artist maybe wasn't as well known back when they released a series of 1,000, and now there's a lot of hype, for lack of a better term, around their name. People go back and they're like, oh well, they had this collection here. If you look at apparitions, there's 1,500 of them. It's really long series, and I don't know if we've seen that with over there. So I'm not sure if the size is corollary to resurgence, but I guess in terms of the opportunity to buy, I see what you're saying.
I mean, we also have to talk about some of it's a function of the market. When market's hot and people are clamoring for more art blocks, they increase the size, more or less whether it can handle it or not sometimes. And I think that if you look at some of the drops that took place at the market highs, they're languishing probably because they're a little bit too big relative to what the algorithm could handle. So, I mean, I think we have to factor that in as well. And you're seeing smaller size drops for art blocks because the market is a little less able to support bigger drops. Art blocks went from doing curated drops once a week to once every 2 weeks, so cutting back on supply to, when the market can't handle it. So I think that when market conditions pick up, we'll probably start seeing drop sizes increase a little bit as well.
Yeah, I think it's a balancing act too. It sucks for an artist if they're like, this is it. It should be a collection of 2,000 for me to really feel good about the variation and getting it out there. That's how I want it to be, and the market isn't there for that. So I guess it's that fine balance of making the right decision at the right time and tabling things for when they can thrive.
Yeah, I think Matt, and I think both you and Vaughn have talked about this before, about this idea of like looking at a collection, and sometimes we want to collect it in sets, and sometimes we're pretty content with like owning like a single piece, and sometimes that's just purely like a monetary based decision given how expensive some of the work is. But yeah, I guess like this might be a question more for the artists and the folks from ARTXCODE, but thinking about as a collector, you know, like when you want to collect a work, like would you want to collect a single work or a set of works, and then does the artist like take that into account, like when they're creating it? Like, would you ever, I guess, like Sofia or Toni, would you ever suggest to an artist that they create a collection that with that in mind, like with either collectors to collect in sets or to collect single pieces, or would you just sort of like allow the market to like do whatever it wants?
Yeah, not really. I wouldn't, you know, we're always going to go off what the artist's vision is, right? Of course, we provide some feedback, but I wouldn't push Lars to say like, hey, when you're making this, keep in mind like the people that want to build sets. Like if something naturally lends itself to building a set, or you know, or the artist figures these I envision in a grid like Dimitri did with ringers, then that's great. But I don't see, you know, I don't think it would be beneficial to artificially push it like that.
Yeah, I mean, it's always a case by case basis, honestly, and like really understanding the project and what's going to work best for the project. Because even like, you know, Lars or Luke could be working on two separate like works, and they need completely different mechanics when you're thinking about releasing it, and even like how, where, and how many. So it really is a case by case basis, and really thinking through what's going to be the best for them, and the artwork, because each visual piece has its own life, you know. They have their own, and sometimes even like just their own aura as a whole. So it really is just bit by bit, and going from there.
Yeah, fair. Don't think we have too many questions, so we can wrap up. But before we go, Lars and Luke, I guess I'll start with Lars. I mean, I would like to let people know sort of where they can find you, and if you can publicly discuss what you're working on for like rest of this year, or anything you want to talk about in terms of like new releases, art, collections, etc. Go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. So I guess you can find my Twitter, which, given that we're on this Twitter space, it should be easy to find. But I have a website, larswander.com. It has some of my write-ups and some of my artwork on there. This year I have the Bright Moments drop, and then I've planned two other drops that'll be similar sized long-form drops. And aside from that, I think there might be a few one-of-ones coming out, but it really depends on I guess, what work I make available. And there, of course, might be another drop later in the year, but so far that's all I have planned, and that's really, I think, all that I have bandwidth for.
Yeah, and as well, my Twitter is here. My website is lukeshannon.xyz, though I should probably update it. And in terms of upcoming projects, I don't have too many things that I can like push right now that are in that stage. But if some of these things sound interesting, I think they might be released as kind of one-of-ones or individual physical editions. So if those sound especially interesting, then maybe reach out to Sofia and Toni. And thank you so much for having us on here.
Yeah, cool. Thanks, guys. Appreciate you coming. Thanks to Sofia and Toni from ARTXCODE for coming on and giving us their insight. And obviously a special thanks to Lars and Luke for taking the time out of their busy schedules. Appreciate that very much. And we'll be live on Wednesday with William Upon and Iskra. So look forward to that. We'll include some links a little bit later today. All right. Thanks, everyone, for joining. I appreciate it.
Thanks for coming.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks for having us,
Thanks.
guys.
Thanks.
Thank
Take
you.
care.
Ciao.